Hey there! In this video I will show you the newest version of my Templar Dungeon and Arena healer for Blackwood. Despite seeming a bit weak on paper, Templar continues to be really strong in 4-player content due to its sheer simplicity. Blackwood opened up the build variety massively and I found options that really play into Templar's strengths. By popular request I've now also included a written build summary in the video description. So for those of you that are new to this build series, it is an off-healer build, a hybrid between healer and damage dealer. That means being able to do considerable damage while still being fully capable to heal and support. This is in my opinion the most effective playstyle for a healer in 4-player content, as it has the safety and comfort of playing with a healer, while also being able to achieve some of the highest group damage, enabling burst tactics. I also really like it for pickup groups, as the versatility is ideal for countering any potential weaknesses, and the damage potential is certainly enough to even carry easier content. This build is absolutely designed for experienced players. However, I've also gotten a lot of positive feedback from less experienced players in the past as well. So I would recommend you to watch the entire video first and then decide whether this is a build that suits your playstyle and experience level or not. So let's get into the build now. For the race, I am continuing to play Breton. It seems a really efficient choice, as sustain can be rather tight at the moment. Altmer, Dunmer and Khajiit are really good choices as well, but you will most likely need to build quite a bit more sustain with them. For the Mundus stone, I'm using Thief. It performs better than Shadow by quite a bit, so it is a choice for all build variations I will show you in this video. I play with 64 attribute points in Magicka, and as buff food I use Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Filet. You can also put some points into health if you have to, but it will lose you damage and I personally don't find it necessary. For the potions, the ideal choice is Spellpower, but Magicka drop pods should be fine for easier content as well. For the sets, I find Spellpower Cure and Master Architect to still be the best choice, especially with the changes I made to the build with Blackwood. Spellpower Cure remains on top of the support set food chain, being just super strong and convenient to play. Master Architect is also a strong offensive support set, though not the strongest. It is however the most convenient for this build and thereby gets the most out of it overall in my opinion. I can perfectly backbar it and that is exactly what I'm doing now. The old 2 arena weapon build still works fine, but the damage potential with the 2 new mythics, Harpooner's Wading Kilt and Death Dealer's Fate, is significantly higher. On my front bar I am however continuing to use a Maelstrom Lightning Staff. As for the mythic choice, Harpooner's Wading Kilt has the highest damage potential. Death Dealer's Fate on the other hand is far more reliable and results in a more enjoyable playstyle in my opinion, so my choice is the Ring. For alternative gear options, you could replace Master Architect with another backbar only set. I think the most interesting options are Saxhleel Champion, Roaring Opportunist, Hollowfang Thirst or Stonetalker's Oath. You can also play monster sets instead of the mythic items. Mother's Sea Knight and Iceheart could be interesting for really safe achievements, but outside of that I wouldn't recommend it, as both mythics just outperform monster sets quite easily. You can also play with 2 double bard sets, either with double arena weapons or dropping the Maelstrom Staff. The only case where I would recommend that is using Elemental Catalyst in longer single target fights, as it is the strongest damage support set by far in those scenarios. You could also backbar Olorim to get Elemental Catalyst on your build, but I would only do that with really well coordinated groups. For easier to get gear options, you first of all can use the normal versions of all the perfected sets. For the 5P sets I would recommend getting Spellpower Cure as soon as you can. For an easy build completion, you could then craft or buy a Magicka DPS set like Mother Sorrow or Juliano's. Of course, the alternative support sets to replace Master Architect with can also be easier to get gear options. Depending on the set choice, you will end up with different armor type combinations, but you want as much light armor as possible. For traits and enchantments, Full Divines with Magicka for the body pieces and Arcane or Infused with Spelldamage for the jewelry remains the best. Whether Arcane or Infused is better is theoretically situational, as it depends on the exact buff up times. But they are so close that it is basically irrelevant, so go with whatever you have. And for the weapons, it is Precise Shock front bar for combining close to maximum DPS with vulnerability up times. And on the back bar, it is Infused Berserker. Okay, champion points. The best choice for the slotted blue nodes is Fighting Finesse, Backstabber, Biting Aura and Master at Arms. though there are arguments for playing Thaumaturge and or Weapon Expert when you either can't consistently flank or you need to heal so much that you lose a lot of your direct damage and so your dots and light attacks become more impactful. And for the general unlocking order, I recommend Precision, Fighting Finesse, Backstabber, Piercing, Biting Aura, Mastered Arms, Flawless Ritual, War Mage, Eldritch Insight, Quick Recovery, Preparation, Elemental Aegis, Hardy, Blessed, and lastly Tireless Discipline. For the slotted red nodes, I recommend Boundless Vitality, Ironclad, Rejuvenation, and Siphoning spells. For certain encounters, you can also take Expert Evasion or Slippery for extra safety. And Spirit Mastery can be pretty neat as well if you're just dying your way through content. The resurrection speed on the Templar with that node is just completely ridiculous. Anyways, for the unlocking order, I recommend Boundless Vitality, Ironclad, Rejuvenation, Tumbling, Mystic Tenacity, Hero's Vigor, Siphoning Spells, Defiance, Hasty, Tireless Guardian, Fortification, Nimble Protector, Savage Defense, Sprinter, Piercing Gaze, Tempered Soul, and lastly Bashing Brutality. For the next section, we look at skills. So the main spammable remains Puncturing Sweeps, an absolute must-have skill for the Templar, as it procs the Burning Light passive, dealing really strong damage. And it also works in both AoE and single target, and is a very powerful stealth heal on top of that. For an execute, I have Radiant Oppression, another must-have. Really powerful execute ability with high range, which is also great for picking out low health targets. I then have 2 of my 4 10-second dots on my front bar, namely Unstable Wall and Mythic Orb. And the last skill slot is somewhat of a flex spot. I previously used Purifying Light, which still works great, but I recently switched to Rearming Trap, sacrificing a small amount of healing for more damage and a lot more streamlined rotation. Trap also allows me to use the Ultigem passive from Fighter's Guild again. But you can also play with Channeled Acceleration or another dot like Scalding Rune. The DPS difference is pretty small. Moving on to the back bar, I have 2 additional dots, Solar Barrage and Blazing Spear. Having Blazing Spear on the back bar is important for the passive. For my healing, I then have Combat Prayer for burst healing, and of course the Minor Berserk buff, and Radiating Regeneration I have as my hot for more passive healing output and to keep up Spellpower Cure. You can also use Illustrious Healing instead, but I think Regeneration is a lot nicer to play in 4-player groups. And in the last slot, I have Siphoning Spirit as my minor Magicka steel source for some additional healing. For my ultimates, I mostly use Meteor on both bars. Front bar just for the passives and back bar for actual use. You can also play with Crescent Sweep, but I find Meteor works better with Master Architect. You can also use Warhorn or Barrier in some situations. And if you don't use Master Architect, Elemental Rage is a good choice for really strong burst damage. In terms of passives, you want to have all 3 class lines. Destruction and Restoration Staff, Light Armor, Mage's Guild, Banish the Wicked from Fighter's Guild, both passives from Undaunted, all racial passives, and of course from Crafting, Medicinal Use from Alchemy, as well as Gourmand and or Connoisseur from Provisioning. At this point in the video, I would have liked to show you a number of different damage parsers with different setups. Unfortunately, I did all my testing on the PTS, didn't save anything, and don't have the mythics on live yet. So to give you an idea of how the damage numbers look, here are 2 parsers I did on live with Spellpower Cure, Master Architect, and 2 single crit monster set pieces. 59k DPS with a completely selfish damage rotation, and 54k DPS with healing and support. Essentially, all the main gear and skill options I've shown you perform within 15% DPS difference, from the lowest to highest. With double arena weapon at the bottom end, different offensive monster sets in the middle, and to nobody's surprise, the mythic kilt at the very top with the mythic ring as a close second. The differences between Rearming Trap, Purifying Light, and the other dot options are also extremely small, with Trap performing the best overall, and especially in actual fights, as the longer duration makes it more efficient when using a lot of healing. I play a partially static, partially dynamic rotation, giving me less things to track and still a lot of freedom to react to the fight. For that, I'm recasting Unstable Wall, Mythic Orb, Blazing Spear, and Solar Barrage in a 10-second static rotation, as well as Trap every second rotation. In the remaining time, I then dynamically use my healing, support, and spammable, prioritizing of course healing and keeping up the support, and then using the remaining time to push DPS with my spammables. With Templar's DPS absolutely depending on puncturing sweeps and radiant oppression, we want to have as much time for using them as possible, while also keeping up our dots and support. For that, we need to utilize pre-buffing as much as possible. So we want to apply our support every time right before going into a fight, and also utilize every phase where we can't or at least don't need to deal damage to refresh everything, to create a small window of high burst damage afterwards. And of course you want to be weaving. Weaving is important on every build, but even more so this one. Because a lot of the global cooldowns for an off healer are not dealing any damage, light attacks become, relatively speaking, more important as a damage source. And with the Maelstrom stuff and Solar Barrage, our light attacks deal insane damage. Light attacks are the by far biggest single damage source, reaching situationally over 20% of the DPS. With that explanation, I've already gone into how you play in actual fights a bit, but there's of course a lot more to that. Another crucial factor is positioning. Playing a hybrid role means we need to be in a good healer and a good DD position at the same time. This means being in melee range while still having the damage dealers in a good position to easily heal them. I usually try standing at one side of the target, lining up both damage dealers on one side of me. And if damage dealers don't cooperate, I simply ignore them. After all, I have more important things to do than playing catch with players that think jumping in circles at maximum range increases DPS. You also have to keep in mind that you're playing an off-healer build, that you've chosen a high-risk, high-reward playstyle. So you want to get that reward to make the risk worthwhile. And you do that by being focused and playing proactively. You want to always stay on top of the situation with keeping up your rotation, managing your resources and positioning, and most importantly, thinking about what will happen next, so you can react quickly and precisely. This is what makes it safe to play with so little healing, controlling the risk and getting some nice damage as a reward. So, that is it for this video. As I said, build details are now also in the description. As always, please feel free to ask me any further questions in the comments. I really appreciate all the great interactions and thank you for watching.